To Shanghai now, China's most populous city and commercial hub, has been under a strict lockdown for about a month now. Residents are only allowed to leave their homes in a few parts of the city. And while the port has been in operation, many exports are not leaving Shanghai because port workers and truck drivers who transport the goods to and from the port are also affected by the lockdown. Right now, around a third of the 1,800 container ships stuck in the world are in or around Shanghai. The city's hard lockdown is affecting global supply chains. Many companies which produce in China haven't been getting their goods and parts for nearly 3 weeks. Meanwhile, there's a plan underway to isolate dock workers in an attempt to keep Shanghai port operational.
Containers and loading cranes as far as the eye can see. Shanghai's business heart continues to beat amid the hard lockdown. At least, that's the plan. The idea was to isolate port workers like in a bubble. They'd remain at the port entirely. No one would be allowed in. Port workers couldn't come into contact with anyone, including truck drivers who need a negative test to enter. But port operations are still limited. Truck drivers are being blocked entry due to the measures. That's affecting container terminal activity. As a result of the lockdown, we can hardly get goods in and out from the port onto land. That has led to enormous delays at the port. Meanwhile, container ships have to wait longer just to get a berth in Shanghai. Experts say this will also disrupt European supply chains in the long term.
Let's cross over to Taipei and DW's Zhou Changhan for more. So there are worries that China's capital city Beijing might go into full lockdown if the situation gets worse. What is the latest?
We know most of Shanghai has been in lockdown for nearly a month, and today it has a new low of 30,000 cases in a single day in 3 weeks. But other cities, including China's capital city Beijing, have put up their guard. 3 rounds of PCR testing have been launched in most districts in Beijing in order to test 90% of the city's 21 million residents. And the city has suspended all big events and encouraged people to work from home. The government issued a notice urging people not to travel to Beijing unless necessary. We talked to some of the local residents. They are worried that the situation in Shanghai will happen in Beijing, entering a sudden lockdown. So many people rush to supermarkets and stock up on food and other basic supplies like rice, noodles, and toilet paper.
So with dozens of Chinese cities affected by lockdown measures, what is going to happen to China's economy?
A number of investment banks have lowered their forecasts for China's economic growth due to the drag on the economy from the nearly month-long city closure of Shanghai, as we talked about. The government's growth target is 5.5%, if everybody remembers. A month ago, experts said it's hard to keep 5%. Now it's said to be 4 or 4.5% or even lower than 4%. It's clear we will see a disruption of supply to the overall economy, particularly in cities in full or partial lockdown. People there can't return to work, factories can't easily return to production, students can't return to school, and those without a stable source of income may face more dire situations. And this may further weaken demand for homes, durable goods, and capital goods.
And if we take a look at the bigger picture here, I mean, we've seen the disruptions at Shanghai port. What are the consequences for worldwide trade?
China is a key production base that many countries around the world rely on, especially in terms of technology manufacturing. Shanghai or even Beijing in lockdown could affect the production of semiconductors, phones, cars, and even toys. We have seen a massive buildup of world's containers stranded outside Chinese ports. Among the countries most affected, the U.S. imports about 20% of its goods and 35% of its electronics from China. Problems in the Chinese supply chain will affect the supply of the goods in the U.S. and therefore drive up the price of a range of products. That's why economists predict that inflation in the U.S. will further intensify.
DW correspondent Zhou Changhan in Taipei. So, thank you. It takes between 5 and 8 weeks for these container vessels to make it from China to Germany. So business here and elsewhere in Europe are just starting to feel the problems.
Hamburg is a key destination for products shipped from Shanghai and other ports. Now many shipments are delayed for weeks. Bernd Müller has noticed the difference. He's director of purchasing for the wholesaler Reicher. Could you take a look at our main problem today? Our current shipment of 12 containers was supposed to be loaded yesterday. The ship has departed from Shanghai, but will make a stop along the way. Well, that wasn't originally planned, but nowadays we have to live with everything and be grateful it's on the way here. Despite the current disruptions, customers should receive their orders on time. There are sometimes a lot of production orders behind these small screws. The customers have large machinery that may be waiting for the final screws. When there's less time pressure, the company can turn to other Chinese ports or order from other producers, including in Europe. We talk a lot to our suppliers. They try to improvise somehow, such as using other ports, so we don't turn to other suppliers. Instead of Shanghai, they might use Ningbo, which is situated further to the south. The screws are then transported to a different port by ship or truck. The suppliers' factories in China are still operating, but only to a limited extent. There are various reasons. People who have COVID are at home. Some employees are not returning because they can't get to their workplaces. The company has gotten used to improvising, but another large Chinese city going into lockdown could trigger more disruptions.